Okay, well, why don't we get started? First of all, welcome and thank you to the Diversity Center for having me. I'm Rose Wong. I'm an assistant professor in the social work department, which is right here in Mikojan Hall, which is over there now. And we have two special guests who are from counseling services. We have Shauna Hong and Brian Guterslow, who are here also to give us some more information and make some comments about the presentation and the discussion we're having. How many of you are, I see some of you in the back, are most of you who are participating in this talk today seated here in the front mostly, or are you in the back also interested? Okay, no, that's fine. I'm just wondering who we're talking to. All right, well, so welcome. So the presentation and discussion today is about, does depression look different in Asians? And I'm here to talk about this topic because that's what I do. I've been doing my research on. I'm a social worker and I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I do community-based research on how Asian immigrants, but more specifically Chinese immigrants, express and experience depression differently. So I did that for my dissertation research at UC Berkeley, which I completed about 4 years ago. And then more recently, just in the last couple of years, we've been with clinicians who work in the community as main collaborators, developed materials, education materials, such as posters, brochures with symptom checklists, and some videos that I'm going to show you some clips from later on that are developed mostly in Chinese language and that talk about more culture-specific expressions of depression, some of the immigration-related stressors that happen to people that are related to depression, which they don't know about. So I'm going to just go on to my next slide and tell you what the objective of this presentation is. First is to provide you with some information about how depression is expressed in Asian groups, and also how that may be different from how it is expressed by white populations or mainstream Americans. And then, most of all, I really want to do my best to have a very good open discussion with you. So I need to understand, from your point of view, what are you looking to learn as well here? What information do you want to obtain? And also, I want to hear from you, your knowledge, because research on mental health in minority populations is this very small endeavor done by just a handful of people across the nation, actually. So we really don't know that much about it, and the work has to be with real people in the community, including students, to develop good measures that detect depression accurately, that make sense to people, that are meaningful to people, and to know really what the nature of the problem is, etc. So the second part of the objective is, I want to hear from you, what are your questions, what do you want to know, and your knowledge. Do a few of you want to just share why you're here today, and what interested you, so that we can best adapt what we tell you today to what you would like to know about. Want to share about that?
Sure. Well, I just saw the sign out on the front, and I'm just interested because I do work with Asian American students, and things come up as they share certain things, and so it's able to, for me, I just want to know how to identify.
Yeah, okay, great.
Yeah, because my friend was talking about it, it's online, but I'm going to grad school for MST actually, and I have friends who are Asian American going through depression, so I want to know what to do to help them.
Okay, great. Would anyone else like to share what interested you in coming today? Okay, that's all right too. But thank you very much for coming. I know you're interested, so if something comes up and you want to ask questions, that would be fine. I need to backtrack just for 1 second, and that is the reason we're filming this is that we would like to put it on a website, and that website is called a Diversity and Social Justice Teaching Guide. It's a website that a campus project that a handful of professors are working on to create a resource for our professors, but people off campus could view it as well, to learn about how they could develop their teaching with regard to teaching about diversity and social justice issues or awareness, etc. Okay, so why don't I just give you a real quick background on why I'm interested in this. And I was a little bit thinking that some of you might have come today for the same reasons. I shouldn't assume that, of course, but it's possible. Okay, so I grew up as an immigrant here in California. I grew up in Alameda. I came to the U.S. when I was 5 years old. And when I was 5, my family, the youngest of 5 kids, we moved to Alameda. My grandfather was already living in the States. He had been living here for, I don't know how long, maybe 40 years. And my grandmother, who had been living with us in Hong Kong, came over just a handful of years. I came over in 1971 as a 5-year-old. She came in 1965 when it was possible for families to reunite in the United States. And when we got here, when I was 5, 6 years old, she was extremely depressed. And she was not talking, she was not eating. She had psychotic symptoms as well. She had very severe depression. As a matter of fact, when we were in Hong Kong, my father took her in for treatment, and she was getting electroconvulsive therapy in Hong Kong and taking medications as well. But when we got to the U.S., she had reunited with her husband, whom she had been married to for 30 years, but had not seen for 30 years as well. Okay, and she was very depressed, and he was not getting her. So it was really seeing her living with them for several years when I was very young that influenced me a lot about mental health problems. How can we help immigrants? How can we help immigrants who don't speak English? How can we help people who don't know about mental illness? And there are so many people who suffer very quietly, right, in our families, amongst our friends, because of the cultures they come from and what they believe immigration is, what they believe their social roles in life are, etc. So that's what inspired me to be in the mental health field and to also do this type of research work. Okay, so let me go through just a bunch of slides very quickly, and then I want to ask you. I want to really know. I mean, there's a lot that I can show you, but I want to try to sense what's most interesting to you. So why don't I go through a few slides real quickly, and then I'll ask you what you would like to see more of, okay? So these are just some rates of depression I picked out real quickly from the literature. Adolescent girls have the highest rates of depressive symptoms. Asian American college students have higher levels of depressive symptoms. Chinese, Filipino, Japanese, and Korean immigrants report also higher symptoms than whites. Chinese Americans have a lifetime prevalence rate as high as 17%, with 10% reporting major depression within the last year. 71% of Southeast Asians also meet criteria for major affective disorder. Okay, I want to tell you about these rates of depression. The literature, the research literature, shows all kinds of things, okay? Depending on who conducts the study, who's given the measure, whether they're having someone trained who talks with the person, the patient in the primary care clinic, for example. The measure that's being used, how much they explain the items to each patient who's participating in the study. So you get a whole range of different rates. But on average, and in the larger studies, they're going to report rates that are very low for the immigrant generation and much higher for U.S. born. So the longer we have been in the United States, like we're second generation or third generation, those rates of depression are going to match the rates of depression in the white population, or maybe even go a little bit higher. But for the immigrant population, the first generation, those rates are generally appear very, very low. What are your thoughts on that? Are those true rates? Is that reality? Do you feel there's something wrong? What's your reaction?
because, I mean, I'm not saying from experience, but more what I've seen in my peers is that who being here, who parents, were immigrants, and I feel like there's this another expectation that they're supposed to be American and know their own culture. So I feel like there's more pressure on them. So I mean, it kind of makes sense to me.
Okay, so you're saying it makes sense to you that people who are U.S. born and who have been here longer, then they would express as much symptoms or as high level of symptoms as European Americans? Is that what you're saying?
Maybe.
Yeah, okay, so that's possible. And actually, we're going to get to that, but the research, and my research as well, does show that to be so. That's because you're pointing out something very important. That's because the more acculturated we are, we use the same language as, and we are also talking about very severe symptoms like suicidal thoughts and more psychological and affective symptoms. We endorse those types of items and talk about those things more easily. Yet if we're less acculturated and not so proficient in English, like recent immigrants or maybe people who have lower levels of education, they tend to endorse those items more weakly, not as strong, okay, those same items that you find on a measure. And so the idea is that that could lead to underreporting, it's called, or underdetection, or under-recognition of depression. So even though you have two people who have the same level of depression, they're going to answer certain questions differently from the other group of people who are more immigrants, who are less integrated, assimilated to U.S. society. Okay? So the research findings do show that. But the main point here then is that these results are likely biased, right? They may not be so accurate. And from the clinicians in Chinatown, et cetera, who work with Chinese populations, who work with low-income Chinese populations, as well as educated recent immigrants or educated people who speak Chinese, whose primary culture, let's say, is Chinese, they will report very differently. They will have a more of a tendency to show emotional restraint, right, and wanting to have emotional control. So they report a little bit differently, different kind of symptom. And that's what the presentation is about today, to have some sensitivity and knowledge of that and get a feel for whether you think this makes sense or doesn't make sense. Maybe one day you want to do some research in this area as well. Okay, any questions so far?
Do you think that some of the assessment tools that are used by, let's say, dominant culture clinicians also don't speak in terms, not so much language barrier, but also kind of terms that are used typically, like if we're talking about Chinese immigrants, that are even used by Chinese or Asian immigrants? Because I find as a clinician oftentimes I'm adjusting kind of the words that I use, because oftentimes Asian immigrants or first generation Asian folks don't identify as much with certain terms that I think in dominant culture, I'm not sure whatever term to use, we commonly use. Is that, do you resonate with that? That might skew the numbers as well?
That is exactly this whole area of research, assessment research, is to figure out which expressions are relevant to the Chinese concept and construct and the Chinese experience or the Asian experience. I keep on saying Chinese because that's what I've done my research on. But just as a quick side point, it's really important to recognize that, okay, this research was done in Chinese. The next step is, if let's say Japanese Americans or Hmong Americans feel this is relevant to them, then we need to take that and test it and validate it for the other groups. We can't really assume, because there's so many, fine cultural differences, that is valid or not valid. Okay, so that's just a side point. Even though I'm talking about Chinese, I don't want to really completely assume unless we get some experts, or people who can participate and help us figure out for other cultural groups whether it's relevant or not. So, answering your question, I want to show you there's a measure called the Patient Health Questionnaire. It's a 9-item questionnaire that's based on the definition of depression in the DSM-5. The DSM-5 is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders that the United States uses. And these are the 9 criteria, or main symptoms of depression according to the DSM. Okay, I'll read them to you. Little interest or pleasure in doing things. However, Chinese immigrants, the ones who are more educated, come from more affluent backgrounds, they usually will tell you, oh, I've lost interest in photography, I've lost interest in fishing, etc. But sometimes people with less education and who are not accustomed to thinking about what are my life pleasurable activities and what I spend my time doing, they have some difficulty with answering this, right? They kind of look at you and wonder what they should say. Okay, so the next question is feeling down, depressed, or hopeless. There are different ways of saying unhappy or depressed in Chinese language. Some people think that some of the clinicians I worked with who participated in creating these materials said, oh, save the formal word depressed for maybe the more educated. For perhaps those who are a little bit less educated or come from different backgrounds, they like the expression that's, my heart is not open, I'm unhappy. So there are different expressions that make more sense to people. So the next one is trouble falling or staying asleep or sleeping too much. So that was about sleep disturbances. A few, not a lot, but some immigrants who answered this question will ask you, well, I have trouble falling asleep, I don't have trouble staying asleep, no, I don't think I sleep too much. How should I answer this question? It's a little bit complex, in some ways. Feeling tired or having little energy. Asians usually understand this very, very well, not having energy, having this very basic somatic complaint. Poor appetite or overeating. Many clinicians, Chinese clinicians, felt that the idea of overeating was not so culturally valid. Chinese people want to overeat, I guess. Overeating is not necessarily a bad thing to enjoy food and eating. So it's not such a relevant concept. Another one is feeling bad about yourself, or that you are a failure, or have let yourself or your family down. That makes sense a lot. That's very culturally relevant, the concept, maybe stated in a slightly different way. How about this one? Trouble concentrating on things, such as reading the newspaper or watching television. So it's about concentration and being able to accomplish or do things because of poor concentration. I think concentration is a really easy one for Chinese immigrants to answer because they're very focused on understanding what's happening in their head, what they can do, they can't do anymore. So it's a very mind-functioning, focused type of symptom. Okay, the next item, technically it's called psychomotor agitation or retardation. The way it's worded in this commonly used measure is moving or speaking so slowly that other people could have noticed. Or the opposite, being so fidgety or restless that you have been moving around a lot more than usual. And quite a few people out of the 227 we surveyed in Chinese language, because this item was put into a measure, a pilot measure. This item was not put in directly, but we gave this measure as well as the measure I was creating. And a lot of the respondents said, well, how do I know what someone else noticed about me? It's just a lack of habit with thinking in that way, so answering that question could be very difficult. Thoughts that you would be better off dead or of hurting yourself in some way. So suicidal ideation, it was very, what we found using a statistical analysis is that people who are more acculturated, and that would be measured in different ways, would definitely respond to this question more strongly than someone who was not acculturated, even though they had the same level of overall depression. So what we say is that some of these items are biased. They're giving us systematically biased information. So maybe the measure then, given these biases on a few of the items, the measure maybe working better for people who are more acculturated and a little bit less well for finding those people, recognizing those people who are a bit less acculturated. And that could be a major, major problem because a lot of people would know would be missed. Any questions so far or any comments? Okay, let's go on a little bit further and see where we can answer more of Ryan's questions that he brought up, which are very important. So this is it's Audrey Magazine online, an online magazine called Audrey Magazine, and this was from May 23rd. It's about mental illness and suicide among Asian Americans, and it talks about 3 Asian American college students who committed suicide recently. And I've been reading and learning about suicide recently, and it fascinates me now because there's a strong overlap, of course, with depression. What is that overlap? The overlap has to do with why people don't get care, why they delay, take a lot of time before they wait till they're very, very serious, where their condition is very bad before they go get help in both cases. Maybe you can help me out with this to get this kind of the picture right. So most people who attempt suicide or have suicidal ideation, many of them have depression or other psychiatric disorder, right? But if you take the whole group of people, a lot of people have depression, right? Of course, not all of them will commit or think about suicide. Okay, that's just the background, you know, how we think about how we use depression to also address suicidal risk and treat for suicidal risk. So we have people who are depressed. How do we detect who's at risk, and how do we help those people who are at risk of suicide? Okay, so there's that going on. But what's interesting about this, I've been reading recently, is that I think Asian American young adults, I think only women, but I think or is it young adults in general, that we have the highest rates of suicidal behaviors, be it attempts and suicidal ideation, etc., than any other group. But yet the suicide rate is not much different from that of white Americans. But that tells us, well, a lot of young people, Asian American young people, are getting to that point of thinking about and attempting suicide. Okay? But a lot of them are. But they're not committing they're not succeeding in committing suicide much more than, let's say, the white population. So that cry for help is very, very strong and very, strongly prevalent as well. So I think for me that points to, why aren't people going to get help sooner? Or why is suicidal expression the form of expression that's being used for, emotional, mental, psychological distress? Do you see what I mean? I'm not sure if I explained it well. Why are we getting to the point of suicide, which is a very, very severe state, right? Before getting help. Okay, let's go back to this, and we'll get a little bit more information. So this we kind of talked about already, but could these findings be wrong? And these findings are from the first national Asian American psychiatric epidemiologic study. It's called the NLAS, N-L-A-A-S. And some of the findings are immigrant women have lower rates of mental health disorders than U.S.-born Asian women. So that's the question of, are we detecting accurately? But these are the findings that are reported out there in society. Immigrant women and immigrants in general have very low rates. So they don't really need that much help, right? Do you believe that to be true? No, I mean, we know. We live out there with Asian Americans, right? All right, so the other finding is men who are not proficient in English had lower rates of most mental disorders than men who are proficient in English. So if I can get my research published, I'll tell them, well, you know, that's because those who are proficient tell you they have a lot of depression, but the ones who aren't proficient are just kind of like saying, oh, well, I don't know. Right? Okay, and how do you interpret findings like this? Being unemployed is significantly associated with major depressive disorder only in whites and Latinos, but not in Asians and blacks. Psychiatric disorders and mental distress are associated with detrimental effects on employment status and absenteeism in Latinos as with white American-born populations. But there is mixed evidence among Asian Americans. So that means that Asian Americans, when we have mental distress and we have mental disorders, it's not impacting our employment. We're not losing our jobs, we're not going to work any less, we're not whatever. Is that believable? There are hypotheses about Asian hardiness and stoicism. Okay, maybe those could be true or not true. Let's look at a couple more ideas here. Now let's look at people's help-seeking behaviors, okay? So Asians and African Americans have the highest disparities in receiving adequate care for depression compared with non-Latino whites. Now there's a finding that shows that we are not getting care. 68% of Asians with past year depressive disorder did not access mental health treatment. Are these believable statistics to you? Yeah, a bit more believable. For me too, actually. A little bit more closer to what we think and see, working in the community. U.S.-born had higher rates of service use than immigrants. Third generation plus had highest rates. That's believable. That's believable as well. Asian Americans have the lowest rates of mental health services utilization in the U.S. So some of the problems of why Asian immigrants don't seek help, which are in the literature, have to do with stigma, mental illness, and different types of cultural barriers to getting help, including belief in fate, denying the need of help, having little knowledge about depression, having a somatic conceptualization of illness. That means I don't think my problem is psychological emotion and having all these physical symptoms. I really am. I do have these physical symptoms. And an emphasis on emotional restraint and control is very important for an Asian culture, especially for men, to not lose control of one's emotions. It might be even worse of an experience to lose control of our emotions than it is to experience that sadness itself. I'm out of control. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know what's happened to my thinking. I don't know what's happened to my emotions. So that's a very important Chinese symptom. So my research was to consider a Chinese construct of depression, that it isn't mostly, such as the DSM one that I talked about, the Western one, it isn't mostly psychological symptoms plus the core the core sleep and appetite disturbance symptoms, but there's a lot of psychological symptoms, a lot of a large variety of somatic symptoms, as well as what I call interpersonal symptoms. So I'll show you a quick diagram of what that looks like. So depression is the big circle, and each of the little circles represents these three subconstructs: psychological, somatic, and social. And some of the social interpersonal symptoms, can you read that? Okay. Just to give you an idea of what that was, these were derived through qualitative interviews with people who are Chinese immigrants who are diagnosed with depression in the community, and with interviews with 30-something plus mental health and health clinicians who work with Chinese immigrants. And these are these sort of interpersonal symptom expressions that came out of all of those interviews. And let's just look at a couple. How about this one? you hide your life difficulties from other people. Does that sound familiar with Chinese or Asian cultures? How does that reflect, do you think, Chinese culture or Asian culture? What is that about? What would you say is the cultural value or cultural emphasis or consequence associated with that?
Saving face.
Exactly. People want to save face. They don't want other people to know your problems. Can you say more about what saving face is and how that impacts the person?
It's just the idea of not wanting to shame like yourself or your family if you have family problems to other people. And so, yeah, we don't want to air out our dirty laundry to
All right. That's a very nice description. But you take that description and you make that and understand that as a person's whole worldview. It isn't just, oh well, we value that, but no, we really live that completely. Everything I showed to the outside impacts me, impacts my family, and we will be discriminated against. People will show prejudice. My younger sister won't be able to marry. My parents will be looked down upon. The pressure is, we know that it's enormous, right? It's not just, well, we don't want to look bad. There's a little bit more than that. So here are some of these interpersonal items. How about, oh yeah, here's one. You think you made your family lose face? And here, this one's very important. You feel you're a burden to your family and society. It's that in a study about suicide in older adults in San Francisco that came out last year, that was an indicator, a high-risk indicator expression for suicidal risk. And also, another thing about these items is that all of these, the large majority of these interpersonal items, do you think that they indicate mild level, moderate level, or a very severe level, very strong level of depression? What would be your just feeling or your knowledge about that?
Can you rephrase that question?
So if I were to have all these symptoms, from the ones I read out to you, from this list, and so let's say a person can have a mild level of depression, a low level of depression, or it could be moderately strong, it could be very strong, and at the top, you would have thoughts about hurting oneself, life is meaningless, etc. So do you think that indicates mild, moderate, or very high level, very severe level of depression? Most of these interpersonal symptom expressions. What do you think? What would you guess? Let's say you have who's talking a lot about these types of symptoms. I don't want to go out. I don't want to socialize. I don't want to tell people about my problems. I feel like I'm a burden. I feel like I'm not. I don't have the kind of men say this a lot. I don't have the kind of respect for my work and for my family as I should have.
I think it can be all across the spectrum of having these interpersonal symptoms.
Yeah.
It can be mild, it can be moderate. It depends, what people are holding inside their heart is, we can never guess. I think it can be across the spectrum because even people who are very, very severely depressed, they're often going to work. They're often participating in family, but we often see here in our counseling center people who are even, moderately depressed, but with the vast majority of these symptoms that they're holding in their hearts, and they're struggling deeply.
Right. No, you're absolutely right in that the expression of these symptoms, it depends on how strongly you express the symptom, right? You have a mild level, a moderate level, or a strong level of that symptom. And certainly it's across the whole continuum of severity, we call it. Of all the clinicians we interviewed, asking them, well, these items, where do they fall on the severity continuum? Most of the clinicians, based on their experience, they said that these represented sort of a mild level of depression. But actually, in the analysis that I did, which was using item response analysis, and item response analysis is what they use to create academic testing, intelligence testing measures of all types. So it can tell you which item is very difficult, which item is not so difficult, which items are easy. So in the same way, I know which items, which symptom expressions are the most difficult or most severe. So I use that type of analysis, and we found out that actually the majority of these interpersonal symptoms indicate, moderately severe to severe depression, even though the majority of clinicians interviewing them about, well, where do you think these would fall? They said these would fall down low. And they also said, on average, low energy, fatigue, and poor concentration. They thought that those symptoms, when their patients said that to them, that they had these problems, indicated moderately strong depression. But in the model, those are fairly on the weaker side. Okay, so that just gives you a little bit of background on the previous research. That previous research found 59 items. If you're interested, you can take some of these handouts when you leave, okay? 59 items. There's somatic items, there are interpersonal items, and more psychological items, like from the Western measure, that are listed in level of severity from item 59 all the way down from item 1. So clinicians can use these also to become familiar with sort of wide range of symptoms. And can I ask, from your experiences working with students, do you find that there's a large range of physical complaints that students come in with, or are they very aware of their psychological symptoms, or do they express some of these more social interpersonal symptoms?
Are you asking about all the students that come in?
Asian students, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, there's a range. Since our counseling center is connected with the health center, it's not unusual for a student to come in with some kind of physical complaint and get checked out by the doctors, and then they say, well, physically it doesn't seem like there's anything wrong with you, but as we're talking, I realize there's all this stress in your life or whatever, so why don't you go to the counseling side and see if there's anything that they can help you with. So it's not unusual, like you're saying, that somebody can experience something physically and then it turns out to be kind of more of a psychological link. And I don't know that we've studied, how often do students come in referred by the medical side? Are those more the Asian American students? Are those more students of other races? I do feel like I have both read research and experienced as a clinician that a lot of the times those are the culturally kind of understandable ways of experiencing, I have this constant stomach ache, or I have this constant headache, or I have all this tension, and it is a physical thing, but as we're talking about it more, they start to make those connections between what's going on in their lives.
Right. And what you've told us is exactly also the story that is captured in some of the research, is that Asians tend to go to community organizations and to primary care, especially primary care, to get help. There are many cycles and many visits and attempts to resolve physical problems before people themselves, only when they're starting to not be able to function so well at home and at work, that they really begin to have to recognize that the psychological and emotional symptoms are bothering them so much, because now they can't function in their life responsibilities anymore, and that becomes a problem. So that's a very common route. And the reason that thinking about 3 dimensions of depression or sub-dimensions of depression is important is that there's a group of people who conceptualize their problem as somatic. And there's a group of people who might tend to conceptualize and express and experience their problem, their depression problem, as mostly interpersonal. So they each have meaning. And they're sort of like symptom presentation profiles, we call them. So they each have meaning. That's why we found, even using statistical analysis, that these dimensions do exist and that they are meaningful. Okay. So some of the major problems to address are concerned with mental health disparity. So how do we improve recognition of depression? How do we get people to use services when they're going to primary care, when they're going to community-based after-school programs or immigrant services programs that aren't prepared to recognize depression, help people with depression problems? Outreach and linkage to care is critical, because so many people are left alone without any connection to getting help in any way at this point. Dealing with the community and primary care help seeking, how we can improve that. Early detection before people's conditions deteriorate a lot because it becomes much harder to treat afterwards. What is the role of peers, family, and the community in linkage to care? And how can we create tools for professionals in primary care, for people, social services workers working in the community, so that everyone can really build and develop their role in linking people to care or providing care in the community organizations themselves. And so that links to then the project that I worked on over this past year with a group of about 12 colleagues and also five community members. So this is using a real community-based approach because it's not the researcher coming with some idea, going out there and testing it, but it's going out there every month, having meetings, and working with a handful of people regularly to actually develop the materials that I'm gonna show you right now. So it's developed bottom up, right, from the perspective of people who know about working with Asian immigrants. So why don't we do a check-in real quick? What time is it?
It's about
2:53.
It's 2:53. Okay, so we have about maybe 20 minutes. Is that right? So there are some videos we can watch that we created. So there are 6 videos. There are 2 videos. Thank you very much for coming. So there's a teen boy video, a teen girl video. There's an adult man video, an adult woman video, an older adult man, older adult woman video. They all have introductions by Alan Wong from ABC News and also Mina Lee, who's on KTSF 26 News. And then they have that person, that character in the skit. The person is talking either with a mentor or with a professional about the symptoms they're having, the life problems they're having. Which one would you like to see? The teenage one, boy or girl, the adult, or the older adult one? Which would be interesting for you? All right, let's watch the teenage boy one. Okay, thank you for coming. Okay, let me get that on for you.
Hi, I'm Alan Wong. I'm an anchor and reporter at ABC 7 News in San Francisco, and I'm standing in front of the Chinatown Gate in San Francisco. It's a symbol of the establishment of Chinese communities across the U.S. and the many struggles Chinese immigrants have faced and continue to face in order to succeed in the U.S. One common struggle that may be encountered by Chinese immigrants and receives very little attention is depression. Depression is a mental health condition that can be an obstacle to adapting successfully to life in the U.S. Yet the problem of depression receives very little attention due to the stigma and discrimination associated with mental illness in the Chinese community. It also receives little attention because little is known and reported about how Chinese individuals experience and express depression, which can be different from the way in which other Americans experience and express depression. As a result, both the professionals who provide services to the immigrants and the immigrants themselves have difficulty with recognizing the signs and symptoms of depression, which can be the first step in obtaining appropriate mental health care. A team of Chinese American professionals and community members in the San Francisco Bay Area created the educational film about depression that you're going to see. It's their hope to bring awareness, wellness, and prosperity to the Chinese American community.
Hello, I'm Mina Lee, program host at KTSF Channel 26 in San Francisco.
In the Chinese American community, the prevention and treatment of depression is a public health problem that is not being addressed adequately. Many people, especially immigrants, have little or no knowledge about depression and its treatment. As a result, many suffer alone and quietly, rather than obtain professional care. Depression is a very common mental health condition. Immigrants are especially vulnerable to depression because of the many stresses they face, such as adapting to a new culture and language, finding work, and not having enough social support. However, due to the fear and shame of mental illness, many Chinese do not seek help until their problems become so severe that they're unable to work, study, or care for themselves and their families effectively. Treatment for depression is effective. It helps many people to feel better and to be successful in their life goals and responsibilities. I invite you to watch the following scenes to learn about the symptoms of depression and the stresses or reasons that can trigger these symptoms. Let's find the courage to face our problems and help ourselves and family and friends to recognize when one is suffering from depression and to obtain treatment promptly. Let's watch now.
I'm not motivated. I'm worried because my grades are slipping. My parents say that my grades aren't good enough. They give me a lot of pressure. They want me to do better. They never say anything positive. They compare me with my cousins and their friends' kids. Why have you become like this? What's wrong with you? I think they hate me. They just assume I'm lazy. They get mad at me for talking back. I tell them I didn't grow up in China. They say, what are you thinking? You're like Americans. And then it's, you can't do this, you can't do that. I have nothing to say. I walk away and keep going. They try to control everything I do. I want to be independent. I am sad sometimes too. My teacher asks, what's wrong with me? She says I'm not paying attention. Andy, you need to focus, you need to focus. Why are you acting so strange? Getting mad at us for nothing. They don't talk to me as much now. I have nothing to say. It's better to stay quiet. mom says I don't eat enough, but I don't feel like eating. I'm not sleeping well either. But there are times when I want to sleep all the time. I don't know what's wrong with me. I feel like I'm worthless. Kevin, I have too many problems. I feel hopeless.
Andy, sounds like you have depression.
What?
I think you have depression. The physical and emotional issues you have, they're symptoms.
Depression?
I think so, but to be sure, you'll have to see a professional and get evaluated. I picked up a brochure the other day about teen depression. I'll give it to you.
What causes depression?
Different things, stressors.
Stressors?
Stressors. They're just real life problems. For teens, it could be breaking up or having problems with their boyfriend or girlfriend, living in a tiny apartment with not enough space or privacy, seeing family fights, losing someone important, being bullied, not fitting in, negative self-image. Oh, and a big one is identity issues.
I think house movies.
Yeah. And for some, it could be conflict with their parents, not doing well in school, dealing with two cultures, two languages, not speaking English very well.
Oh yeah, and what are identity issues?
It's figuring out who you are. Am I American? Am I Chinese? Am I straight? Am I gay? Do I identify myself as a man or a woman? What's the purpose of my life? What should I do with my life?
Oh,
So it's very common for people to have depression at some time due to one thing or another. Some people can also have a tendency for depression because it runs in their family. Andy, I had some of these problems too. I had depression in high school.
you did? I was thought of you as a popular and happy person. You always seem so confident.
Yeah, thanks. But even confident people like me can have depression. If you want to talk about being confident, I think you're being confident right now, talking to me and taking a step to get help. It's hard for people to get help.
Did you get help?
Yeah, I got help, but it took me a while.
Why did it take you so long?
I felt ashamed. It's Chinese. Chinese people think it makes their families look bad.
I feel ashamed too. I feel like everything is my fault.
It's normal, no worries, man. It also took me a long time because I kept thinking, it's not a big deal. I can do this. And my parents denied things too. We didn't know I had depression. We didn't know about treatment.
What is treatment?
Treatment means doing something to relieve your symptoms and learn to deal with your stressors better. Actually, there's lots of different treatments. There's activities you do, changes you make in your life, counseling to learn to problem solve, support groups. In some cases, medication can help you feel better. Depends on each person.
Does treatment work?
Yeah, it works for a lot of people. Many people will get treatment and get better. Hey, let's play some basketball tomorrow, and I'll give you this brochure I talked about. You can do the system checklist and read about when and how to get help.
Okay, see you tomorrow.
Alright, see you tomorrow. You can enjoy your teenage years and your time in school. You can have a bright and hopeful future. You may feel sad and hopeless at times, but you have the power and responsibility to change this for yourself and your family. If you have some of the symptoms like those of May and Andy, talk with your school nurse or counselor, teacher, family doctor, social worker, or any health or mental health professional. Tell him or her your symptoms and stressors. Ask for referral to a mental health specialist. If you are very distressed by your symptoms or have thoughts of hurting yourself, obtain professional care immediately. You can also call the following 24-hour suicide prevention crisis lines. The San Francisco number is 415-781-0500. The national number is 1-800-273-8255. Seek resolution, fulfillment, success, and happiness. A brighter future is ahead.
So we made 6 videos of this type. These are, the teen ones are in English original, but they're dubbed in Mandarin and Cantonese, and there are English subtitles as you saw. The adult and older adult ones are in Cantonese original, the Mandarin dubbed version, and both have English subtitles. I think we're probably running a little bit out of time.
3:10.
It's about 3:10. I would suggest maybe we can take some questions, and it would be nice if Shauna could give us some information also about counseling services. Any questions? Anything at all? Or comments?
Yeah, so just to let you guys know, for all students that are registered here at the university, counseling services are available to you, and we call them complimentary because you've already paid for them. So there are no additional costs. You just, every time you pay your registration fee, you're automatically registered for them. So we offer individual counseling sessions. We do couples counseling if you want to talk about your relationship with your partner and how to make it better. We also have some groups that we offer ongoing to talk about relationships with other people. And I think that when we talk about counseling, I think there's a lot of stigma, even just walking through the door. But we always tell people, you know, it's a service that's available to you as students. There's a lot of services that are constantly being cut at the university, so this is something that's available to you at no additional cost. And it's very expensive out in the community if you're not a student here. Like one session with a counselor, an average cost is upwards of $100. And so it's something that if you ever think that it could be helpful to talk to somebody outside of your family about anything personal that's going on in your life, be it relationships, be it, you know, symptoms of depression, be it just school stuff, sometimes it can be really helpful to talk to somebody who's not involved in your life, who's not going to say this is what you should do or, you know, tell you what the answer is, who's just going to give you space to talk and come to your own solutions and support that. And so I always tell people, you know, try it out. Come in, and there's no obligation to stay or to come back if it doesn't feel helpful to you. But if it does feel helpful, then it's here for you. And it is also confidential, so we don't share any information, even of who's coming in outside of the health center. So I don't know if you guys have questions specifically about counseling services on campus or anything else that you have to.
I have one question actually. My question is, I mean, how does one know or think about when you should get help?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, again, different for everybody. I have people come in who say, I'm desperate, you know, there's a situation, I just feel totally overwhelmed, I'm thinking about suicide, or I've never felt this way before, I just feel like I'm having a crisis, I'm crying all the time. So people come in when they feel like they have no other option, and they're kind of desperate and say, I might as well try. And I also have plenty of people come in to just say, you know, I always hear that this is available, and I thought I would try it. And there's nothing, I'm not even sure what I want to talk about, but I just kind of want to have some space to talk and see what comes of that. And so, you know, there's no criteria, anybody's eligible to come in, and I think it's fine to come in at any of those places. I would certainly say we always encourage people to come in if you feel like the normal ways that I cope with stress just aren't working in the same way for me anymore. I feel like I'm not enjoying things, or I'm just feeling like anxiety or depression or stress is affecting my life in a way that I could use some help with. And so that's really the point, and that might be a different point for everybody, but I would say that that's a great point to just come in and see if it feels helpful.
Yeah,
I have
question?
a comment, actually.
Yeah.
For those of us here who are not natively Chinese or Mandarin or Asian at all, kind of to clarify the whole shaming your family thing, there's a rather paradoxical culture of both silence and gossip amongst the Chinese community. It's not so present in the suburbs because you have little boxes and fences and yards and things like that separating you, but especially in Chinatown where everybody's in close proximity with each other, word gets out. People talk about that stuff, it's evening chat over, mahjong table or, over dinner or whatever. So it gets out, and there is a stigma about it. And I think that in some ways it is not actually a very Asian thing, because there's a lot of, it's also a thing that's experienced by lots of people. It's your brain. You should be able to control it. And there's this belief that because it is your body and your emotions, you should therefore be able to force it in some way to behave the way you want it to. So, as a consequence, depression takes place not just of sadness, but also a lot of anger. It might not necessarily be directed at a whole lot of people. It might just be this sort of tension in movement, in language, that comes off as hostile or aggressive to other people. Because this is also not a thing. I remember reading somewhere that a lot of Asian American males tend to be very angry, which is how they kind of channel their frustration and their depression is through anger. Not a whole lot of people associate depression with rage, essentially, is what it is, just outbreaks of poison. And one of the last things I wanted to mention, and this is kind of subjective, but the whole, it's going to be all right. I'm sorry to hear about that. You got to take care of yourself. I'm going to be blunt here. That's tripe. And it's tripe for the following reason, is because the person who has depression will hear it. But these are just words. Unless he or she believes it, they have no power. So, yeah, you can tell them, oh, I'm sorry, let me give you a hug all day, but it's not going to do anything unless they believe it. So the question, therefore, is not so much whether you should verbally comfort them, whether you should or not you should be a physical presence. Because, kind of going on a more of a tangent here, especially in fiction, silence is a very powerful tool. It is a very meaningful tool. There's a lot of meaning in silence. So the whole prospect of, verbally conversing with someone, oh, I'm so sorry to hear about that, and, you really should feel better. You should feel happy. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't. And in a lot of ways it can be counterproductive. So it's just kind of a thing I wanted to show out there.
I know you're saying that that's what counseling does, is kind of say, buck up, you should feel better, be happy.
It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm asking, is your reaction coming out of, I think that's what counseling is going to be, or when I'm sitting with somebody who's, as a friend, when somebody's depressed, I don't know how to...
A little bit of both, honestly, and also depression tends to be cyclical in nature, especially manic depressives. You tend to, you have really low periods, and then you have high, almost ADHD periods of intense creativity and activity and things like that. So it comes and goes. And it's often a long-term thing. We're not talking a couple of months, we're talking years, decades. And you can treat it, but it never really goes away. It's not something you can solve.
Yeah.
If you have it, you deal with it for the rest of your life. It's a permanent thing.
So I think you're talking about, you said shame. It isn't really specific to maybe Asian or Chinese culture. Is that what you said at the beginning?
It is.
And then you talked
It's more
about
universal.
anger. I just want to let you know that all the clinicians that participated in this, they recognize as one of the symptoms that anger, especially in men, is a sign of emotional distress and a sign of depression as well. And your third point, remind me, is about the ways we can oh yeah, it is about, no, not necessarily everyone can be helped. And we were very careful because the clinicians we worked with, they said, treatment is able to help a lot of people. It may not help everyone. So I sort of related to some of the points we were making, so I just wanted to bring that up. Yeah. Would you have any other comments you'd like to?
Well, I took up like 3 minutes. So
That's
it's
fine.
enough.
It's very
Yeah.
nice, actually. Thank you so much for contributing in that way. Any other thoughts?
Not in particular. I think the silence thing is probably prominent among Asian Americans, but honestly, people of all cultures and all walks of life practice it because there's a universal stigma about depression and mental disorders, especially since, I mean, UCSB just got shut up by a guy who was depressed, who had Asperger's, who has mental issues. There's a huge stigma associated with that. And what needs to be tackled is not just culturally specific stuff, but also that, view in particular. I believe post-Columbine, very shortly after Columbine, a lot of people who said, a lot of kids who grew up in that age who also had depression, told their parents about it, and immediately their parents were like, oh, no, we have to put you away from knives and guns. So there's this belief that, if you have depression, you're just gonna snap. And true for some, not true for others, but kind of immediately distancing the person and thinking that they're going to be a physical threat usually does not help things.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly mention, maybe to conclude, is that we did try, one of our main purposes of having a brighter future is ahead and that, seek resolution, happiness, et cetera, the message that's given at the end of the video, is to try to inspire or some kind of a positive or hopeful message of getting back on track. And I think it refers to what you were saying about how if you have depression, it's going to be hard to traverse back into that place of belief and hope and believing that everything's fine. That is exactly what the problem is, right? That you don't believe that anymore. So all that to say is we created these materials, and they do need to be validated or tested to see if it has any impact at all, and how we use them. We create maybe some small workshops, or maybe we need sort of longer-term types of groups that people can come and socialize, with their peers about this topic. So we need to figure that out and test these materials and do something a little bit different to see how we can get a step further. And so, Shauna, thank you so much for coming today, very much, and thank you to all of you for coming too.